welcome or welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to have an interesting video for you guys because Dior reformulated their Quints again. I don't even understand why Dior keeps on reformulating great products. I love the Dior Quints. Last year I kind of got into the rabbit hole and I actually purchased quite a bit of them. I am well stacked in Dior shadows. These are not even all of them, but I did decide to go ahead and pick up a Quint. So the new reformulations are available at Sephora France. And I figure why not pick them up? I'm going to talk a little bit about the differences. I'm not a chemist in cosmetics, so I'm not going to talk too much about the formulation, but I do want to touch base on some things. And of course, I do want to put this new Quint. It's not a new Quint technically. This is the Grand Ball palette, so an existing palette in the new formulation, but I do want to demo this on my face today. Something I need to note is I don't have the Grand Ball palette in the older formulation. I am just not that type of YouTuber. It'd be probably the best comparison to have the new Grand Ball together with the old Grand Ball. But I find Dior Quints incredibly expensive, so I can't really demo them side by side. I do have some comparison swatches together with, for example, this Rose Bouquet. The Grand Ball palette is a palette that I've been eyeing for a long time. It's part of the core line. So to me, it's sort of okay to try out the newer formulation. I hope they're not gonna mess it up too much. As you can tell, I don't have anything on the eyes today, so I'm ready to actually go into some of the details that I already found here, and then I'll go into the demo so I can show you guys what the Grand Ball palette looks like, and also you can see the performance of this palette on the eyes. But let's first talk differences. Now the first difference I think is important to note is to look at the boxes. Now I keep all of my Dior boxes, so I have all of mine. If you wanted to have some, I guess, ingredient comparisons with some of the other palettes that I have the box for, I think it's the Miss Dior palette over here, which is a great comparison box to have because the Miss Dior also has a shimmer shade, a metallic shade, a matte shade, and the Grand Ball palette has the same. So in terms of boxes, you see a little bit of variation, not too much. It kind of looks exactly the same. I think the font is a little bit different, but there's barely any difference. I think the most interested you guys are going to be is probably to look at the net weight. Now the net weight is 7 grams. It's still 7 grams. Also, they're both made in France, and of course the shelf life is an interesting one because Dior has a shelf life, or Dior shadows have a shelf life of 6 months, which is kind of abysmal. I keep my Dior eyeshadow palettes longer than 6 months, by the way. It's still a shelf life of 6 months, so that didn't change. So the net weight didn't change, the shelf life didn't change, and it's still made in France. So what is actually different? Now, first of all, the packaging, just the outside unit carton is a little bit larger. You can barely tell the difference, but it is. And that's because the actual components or the packaging itself is a little larger as well. I'll get into those a little bit later. Now, looking at the ingredient list, like I said, I'm not some type of chemist. I can't really talk to you guys about the details of the reformulation. They haven't really announced anything as far as I know regarding the reformulation. But the first thing off the bat that you see is that in the older ingredient list, one of the first ingredients for every single shadow is talc. If not the first ingredient, it's probably going to be the second or the third ingredient. This is a very talc heavy formulation. So the older formulation is very talc heavy. Now talc, if some of you guys might not know, but talc has been known to cause some health problems. It's in a lot of makeup. There's still a lot of, I guess, debate, I want to say, about it, but you can check out a documentary on Netflix right now. I think it's called Toxic Beauty. And if anyone knows what this documentary is called, please let me know in the comment section down below, because there is an episode talking about talc makeup products. So with that said, what I think is the most important thing that Dior did is take out the talc and reformulate it in a more clean sense. Now, I'm not saying that this is a clean formula by any means, but I do think that they did decide to take out the talc. I also saw some squalane in there. So this is the reformulation of the Grand Ball palette. If I can find the details on the Grand Ball palette and it's older formulation, I will put it in here, but just check out the ingredient list. You know, there's also an episode, I believe, about mica. There's still mica in here, and mica is kind of controversial because you don't know where it's sourced and if it's sourced ethically, but that is a whole nother conversation. I think the biggest difference in this new reformulation is that they're trying to clean up their formulas, and one of the most obvious differences is the newer formulation does not contain any talc. So those were the unicorns comparisons. Let's compare actual components. So the newer components looks actually at first glance it looks very similar. They both have that Dior on the front. They both have that shape. I do want to say that the shape of the newer palette seems slightly, ever so slightly bigger. You can barely tell the difference, but it is. Then next to where you see the biggest difference of the outside is, of course, the older packaging has that classic Dior rim, whereas the newer packaging doesn't have that. What I liked about this rim is that you can press it in and you can open the Dior palette pretty easily. It was a very easy way to open. Whereas this one, I actually don't like. I just dropped it because I don't like how you can open it. It's like a clasp system. So as you can tell, there is this Dior, Christian Dior thing, but you can't easily open it like this. You have to use this, kind of dig your nail underneath and then open it, which I'm not really into this system. I think that that is definitely a miss. I do like the little Dior, you know, logo over here, but I liked the older packaging much better. It was much easier to use, much easier to open. Then of course, let's go into the brushes, kind of little details over here, but the newer brushes, they have only single-ended brushes and there's an embossing in them that says Dior, whereas the older brushes are both dual-ended and it has the Dior logo imprinted on it. The older brushes, although it has more brushes, so you can get sort of 4 of them, they do look a little bit more cheap than the newer brushes, but these are smaller details and not necessarily things that we have all asked for. Keep that in mind. There are some changes here, and I don't think the packaging, I'm sorry Dior, but the packaging is not an upgrade. It feels a little cheaper. It's a little bit larger, feels a little bit cheaper, and a little bit harder to open because I already dropped mine, and if I break a Dior eyeshadow palette, I'm gonna freak out because these eyeshadow palettes are like for 70 euros now. I think I paid 71 euros for this one on the French website. I don't know if that's gonna be the price in the Netherlands. Sometimes in Europe these prices may vary, but I do think that I paid 71 euros for this shadow. Now I found it important to do some comparison swatches, kind of feel a little bit like the formula, because I love Dior shadows and I would be upset if the shadows didn't perform the way that they did, you know, currently. I actually love Dior shadows because my eyes always look so velvet, silky. It's not like highly pigmented, it's very sophisticated, and it's kind of always bringing me a sophisticated eye without me having to try too hard. And that's what I'm hoping for this reformulation and what I'm hoping for the Grand Ball palette. Now, the best, I guess, comparison that I can give you is this Golden Bouquet palette. Now this is a limited edition palette. I love the embossing of the Golden Bouquet palette, and as you can tell, they do look very similar. My review on the Golden Bouquet palette is on my channel somewhere, and basically I can get a pretty look out of this palette, the Golden Bouquet palette, but it's not my favorite palette of the bunch because it doesn't have a lot of different finishes. It has a matte and the rest is sort of just like a matte or a metallic, whereas the Grand Ball palette is much more shimmery. There's some shimmer shades in there, and Dior, I feel, does shimmer shades pretty well. For the shimmer shade, I did compare it to my Poncho palette. Poncho has a really nice shimmery shade, but first I'll show you the swatches, the comparison swatches of the Golden Bouquet palette against the Grand Ball palette. And here you can see that the Grand Ball palette is a much smoother and more vibrant palette than the Golden Bouquet palette. Now I want to stress that I think that the Grand Ball palette in the older formulation was always going to be a bit more vibrant than the Golden Bouquet palette, but it's a nice way to see how these shadows perform next to each other. I think the metallics look very similar, the mattes still look very similar. I think the matte in the Grand Ball palette in the newer reformulation actually looks a little bit more satin and a little bit more smooth, but it could also just mean because that is a newer palette, maybe the shadows just look better. But I actually think that it looks in swatches, it does look better than the Golden Bouquet palette. From the Golden Bouquet palette, down the bottom and up top, you'll see the glitter shade in the Poncho palette. The Golden Bouquet one is much more vibrant, much more stunning, but they give a very similar finish. If you ask me, they both have that kind of glitter reflect in them. They have a little bit of base pigment in them. I'm expecting is a very vibrant festive eye with the Golden Bouquet palette, but not necessarily anything different. But of course, my expectations could be completely wrong. Let's just put them on the eyes and see how they perform. I usually don't use the brushes. I keep them with the eyeshadow palette, but I'm just gonna go in with my Sonia G, my REPHR, to get the best eye look. When it comes to the Golden Bouquet palette, I actually like going in with the darker shadow first and building upon the darker shadow with the other shades. So I'm gonna do the same method with this Grand Ball palette. I'm gonna go in the darker shadow first. I think I'm gonna use my Sonia G, what is this, the Pencil Pro brush, and just see how the shadow performs. There is some fallout over here. There's nothing on my lids. I didn't use an eye primer. And I'm just gonna map out the eye shape that I want before I'll blend it into anything else. So this is a nicely pigmented shadow. Off the bat, looks very smoky. And so far, I think it kind of works the same as the other Dior matte shadows that I have. Very pigmented. Now at this point, I'm going to use a Morphe M573 brush. Time to do a little bit of blending, see how they blend out. So usually with Dior shadows, I feel the blending process is very easy. But for right now, I think the blending is taking a little bit longer than I expected. Personally, a little patchy on this side. I don't know if that is normal. I didn't prime my lids. But I think I can still make it work as long as I just go into the other shades. I want to go into this metallic shade, see how that one performs. I want to use a flat brush, so I'm going to use this one by REPHR. This is the REPHR 21 brush. This is great for cream shadows. Kind of put this all over the lid. Gonna use the same shadow, but then use my finger for the other side. Much more vibrant, more success with my fingers, so using the same technique on both sides. I want to go into the topper shade for sure, because I want to see what this topper shade looks like. You know what? Going in with my finger again, just going on top of everything else. Back to my blending brush, just blending out the edges again. Clean brush, let's go into the lightest shade, maybe pop it in the inner corner, see what that looks like. I sincerely don't like how this looks. I'm gonna try to fix that edge a little bit because it looks so bad. The only shadow I haven't used yet is this yellow one. Maybe put that a little bit into a crease. I could try to put it underneath. This is a REPHR 03, by the way. The eyeshadow without any mascara or eyeliner. So let me just pull you in up closer and then I'll put on some mascara and eyeliner, and let's talk a little bit about my final thoughts. Okay guys, so this is the final look with my mascara and some eyeshadow on and my eyeliner, and overall I think it looks really nice. I like the way that this quad or Quint turned out. I think it's a good purchase. I like Quints like this, very festive, but I do have some thoughts. So let's just go straight into my final thoughts. So I knew that there was a reformulation, but I couldn't for the life of me find anywhere why they decided to reformulate it. I heard some people talk about maybe like they're switching up labs, maybe they have a hard time sourcing like certain raw materials, but what I actually think, because of the switches of the talc, I think that they reformulated to make it a little bit more clean, which is kind of, I feel, the trend that has been going on with Dior. Dior has been reformulating a lot of some of their staple products, some fan favorites. They're discontinuing a lot of their old products, and a lot of times it's a little bit more clean. So first of all, for those of you that do like eyeshadow palettes without talc, this maybe is one for you guys to look into. Next to the fact that there's a reformulation, again, I'm not going to go into all the details of the reformulation and the ingredient list because I'm not a chemist and I don't want to lead you down the wrong path. So I'm just gonna, that's all I'm gonna say about that. The price, guys, I think the price actually increased again because I paid 71 euros for it. Again, you know, take it with a grain of salt because I don't know how much it will retail on the Dutch website, but I have a slight feeling that there is going to be a little bit of inflation happening again on top of all of that. So price-wise, it didn't make me any happier. Formulation-wise, you know, this or that, you can care about it or you don't have to care about it, but it is reformulated. It's definitely a different type of formula. Then let's talk packaging. Packaging wise, I'm not happy with this new system. I don't care for it being any different. I like having all my Quints, you know, show up and you see the double line. It looked very aesthetically pleasing to me. The switches, yeah, it looks pretty, but I just don't like the opening of this. I think it's just really difficult to open, especially because I feel Dior is marketed towards older people and I feel this should have been easier. It feels cheaper to open it like this than the older packaging. It's a little bit bigger, which, you know, who cares about that? And I actually wish that the shelf life would have improved. So what I wanted to see was a 12-month shelf life at least on these eyeshadow palettes, and even that is just the same. The shelf life is the same, the net weight is the same, it's still made in France. So far, we're not making it any better. Then, you know, the fact that the brushes are only single-ended and they look a little bit more fancy, I don't really care for. I never used any of the brushes. I always keep them with the palettes anyway because I like having things look aesthetically pleasing. Performance-wise, when I did some swatches, I actually think that this palette swatched beautifully. It swatched next to a palette that I think lacks a certain type of sophistication that Dior shadows usually have. I think that they swatch very similar to any other Dior shadow that I do find acceptable. For example, the Poncho palette, I think it's a very nice palette to have. I love the new dress palette as well. These swatch very soft and buttery and sophisticated as well. This is a very festive palette, the Grand Ball palette, so I'm imagining that this was always going to be a little bit more of a, you know, showstopper eye, smoky eye look. Usually with Dior shadows, I can kind of blend everything out easily. It's one of the things I like about Dior shadows. I often don't have a hard time with them. Dior shadows, I hear, can be a hit and miss, but the core line has actually never disappointed me. The ones that often disappoint me are the limited edition ones. And the darkest shade in this palette, I feel, did come off a little patchy. And I used 2 blender brushes. Of course, used the Morphe that I talked about. And at some point, I went to the REPHR 15, which is a newer brush in my collection. And REPHR brushes tend to always do really well when it comes to blending out. And still then, I still couldn't get the blend that I wanted. And I don't really understand why. Yes, I didn't use an eyeshadow primer, but it shouldn't matter. So that was kind of ticking me off a little bit. And again, I want to say, take everything with a grain of salt and a wedge of lime, because again, I've never tried the older Grand Ball palette, but I want to just disclose everything that I'm finding out right now. The final look looks beautiful. It looks very Dior-esque. It doesn't look like it's from another brand. Dior always gives you that beautiful satin, those satin shades, you know what I mean? They're kind of glimmery. It's a very soft glimmer. It just looks really nice. So I do like the palette as a whole. I think it gives really nice variations. I like the different finishes. I don't like the matte, how it performed, but overall, I think it looks very stunning. Do I think this whole reformulation was worth it? You know, honestly, I wasn't waiting for Dior to reformulate their palettes. I feel like they just reformulated them, and I bought a lot of their reformulated palettes. And now I kind of like, yeah, I'm not gonna rebuy the same shades, like the same palettes all over again. So I don't know, I'm on the fence. Let me know, guys, in the comment section down below what you guys think about this reformulation and if it's worth it. I don't know. I'm frustrated with the prices that Dior is giving lately. I'm frustrated with the packaging, and I wasn't, you know, over the moon about the performance of this palette, but I am very happy with the end result. So that's kind of my final thought on that. Dior, if you're watching this, make a palette that's, you know, that doesn't have a shelf life of 6 months, because it kind of feels like you're just trying to get my money. You want me to buy again 6 months after I purchased my first palette? No, I'm just not gonna do it, guys. I'm just not, no. Anyway, guys, I'm gonna sign off here. I wanted this video to be, you know, out here as soon as possible because I know some of you guys are waiting to see a review of a reformulation of the palette and just, you know, overall thoughts on it. I'm a Dior lover. I am a hobbyist in makeup. I love Dior eyeshadow palettes. This year I decided not to buy all of the limited edition eyeshadow palettes like last year because Dior can get a little crazy to follow and a little expensive, but I do like to feature a lot of Dior on my channel, so check out some of my other content if you are new here. Subscribe to my channel if you like this video. Of course, like this video so the algorithm knows to pick it up and throw it to other people on their feed so that maybe this community can grow a little bit more. I want to thank you guys all so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a beautiful day, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!